Aloha. Today's episode is brought to you by the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, and the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources, and the Livestock Extension Group, as well as the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center for Ag Profitability.
Aloha and welcome to the Livestock Walaʻau, a podcast aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to our livestock stakeholders in Hawaii. We are your hosts, Mele Oshiro and
Shannon Sand.
And today we'll be talking with Dr. David Ripplinger with North Dakota State University. He is a bioengineer and bioproducts economics extension specialist. I feel like that's a mouthful, and I understand a little bit more about what that is now, but we thank you so much for being here with us today. And we took a couple turns for us to get scheduled on here. I'm glad to hear that things are in the weather situations are a little bit better where you're at. So thank you for being here today.
Happy to be here. Yeah, the blizzard struck on the first day of filming, so we had to regroup and come back. And then I'll let you know the main reason I did that is because all 5 of my kids were at home that day.
Oh my gosh.
And it was actually day 3 of the blizzard, so it could have gotten crazy.
Yeah. It gets interesting, right, when you're on Zoom with your kids, because mine always does that. He likes to be able to see his head kind of pop in and out of the screen, you know. So
That's true.
It makes for interesting video. But So yeah, thank you again for being here. I'm really glad I got to meet you at the ERME conference and got talking, because we've been really wanting to learn more sort of about some of the things we're going to talk about with you today. But maybe if you want to just kind of share a little bit of your background and sort of your position there with North Dakota State and with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Dave. I have a majority appointment with NDSU Extension. So my job is off campus, as Mele's and Shannon's are as well. My job was actually kind of unique. It was created by the state of North Dakota almost 20 years ago to work with farmers and industry in the bioenergy space, the bioproduct space, which at the time was seeing a rapid build out for corn ethanol and biodiesel.
Yeah.
I've been in my position for about a decade. And in that time, things have been a little bit quieter, but I've been involved in a variety of projects related to carbon and climate, because greenhouse gas emissions are a big deal with biofuels.
Right.
And that's gotten really popular in the last 3 or 4 years, especially. But you can, in many respects, I kind of think about it. I had about 6 or 7 good years to study up, and now it's showtime.
Now it's go time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of fun. I also have a research appointment, so I do related research. Again, I'm very practically focused. A lot of what I do is kind of different than what other extension educators, agents, specialists do. I meet a lot in small groups, so I oftentimes have coffee with 2 or 3 folks who are looking at project development, working in biofuels or some sort of egg value-added venture. And then the last 2 years, I've been extremely busy with carbon and climate-related programming. And just to make it clear, so I am a native North Dakotan. We are a major energy state in terms of oil, gas, and coal, and relatively conservative in a lot of ways. But I take a very practical position when it comes to climate education, because it is important to all farmers and ranchers across the country. It's something that really can't be ignored, and being able to effectively educate on this issue, carbon and climate, is really important. And my evidence that I've been successful in this, as I mentioned, in Chicago, is across dozens of presentations and hundreds, thousands of participants, attendees. I've only had a couple of times where things went off the track, because climate can be a sensitive issue.
Yeah,
but there's
sensitive.
a lot. Yeah, but there's a lot of
Everywhere,
practical things. There's a lot of practical things that your viewers need to know. And right now, a lot of it might end up being a bit hip pocket. But there are changes in the pipeline for livestock producers, for those who produce cattle from calves all the way to finishing and slaughter, that are going to be increasingly affected by this. And so I'm really excited to be able to join you guys today.
Yeah, well, we're really excited to have you on, but I feel like I'm going to be the one to ask a lot of really dumb questions, because I was like, one, with your title and your background, you sound very smart, and I've known you for a little while now, so I feel confident in saying you're pretty smart. So, but when I hear like carbon and carbon sequestration, I'm going to be honest, I very much feel like it's just goes over my head, and I'm like, what does it even mean in terms of like for producers, or just as an outreach type of what does it mean? Because I was like, my family has like a farm and ranch, and Mele's family has operations, and it's just like, how does that relate to the operation and to people in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really gets to the core of it.
I feel like
And
that was about 6 questions in one.
you know, it is. And then I'll do my best to address it. We might have to come back a few times.
No, that's fine.
Really, there's a number of ways in which this is impacting producers and will impact producers. The first most obvious one is certain practices can capture greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in the soil. That can be crop production or livestock production. Most attention's been given to crop production to date, and that's I think that's properly weighted. But the livestock side of things is just as interesting, and it will be just as important once it fully matures. The other opportunities really come, from reducing emissions, and again, this can come a couple of different ways, and how producers might view this. And I think in general, what's happening is we're seeing incentives provided. And this could be via USDA. They just got $19.5 billion for climate smart ag practices, which is being rolled out now. And many of those practices, your producers may be considering. There's now more money for that.
Yeah.
And there's also these carbon contracts that are out there, and they're just kind of creeping up for livestock right now. But the other side of it that nobody talks about is every business, every individual has some sort of exposure to climate, and we all have what I'm going to call a climate liability. For example, if you have a cow-calf operation or you feed cattle, there are greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. That's just a fact. That's what it is. We produce a lot of beef, which is fantastic, and there's greenhouse gas associated with that. And I think a lot of producers should take note that over time, how they address those emissions could be advantageous or risky, negative. And we're going to see that come over time. I think in general, on balance, it's going to be a positive thing. But for everyone in agriculture, for everyone in general, to understand that, we all have these liabilities, but right now they're not realized. We have these emissions. When and how will they be priced? When and how will this impact you directly? And there's in many respects, there's no escaping it. It's just exactly how and when will this come to farmers and ranchers in any part of the country.
Yeah. That I think that's some of the big questions that we get, right? Is so maybe we're going to take a step back now and talk a little bit about sort of what is those emissions, where it comes from, and sort of who are the main contributors in the sense, right? And I think that's another, I want to say heated topic, but a hot topic, right? In talking about those contributions and where they come from. Is that something you think you can touch a little bit on? Because I feel like that's kind of where too, in a sense, when we have these sort of opportunities from USDA for funding to support different opportunities in research or, in your production to mitigate some of those emissions, we have to understand which are the big, or who are the big contributors and whatnot in that sense. So
yeah,
I hope that's a very I don't know, roundabout question, but
no, I know exactly what you're getting at. And as I mentioned before, I mean, one of the first things to realize is that agriculture is a major emitter of greenhouse gases. And that's totally okay because we feed the world.
That's what I was going to say. People have to eat, right?
Yeah. A lot of people want to downplay it, and there has been some really bad math that's been done that have overestimated our emission, but they are still sizable. Because there's no other industry like agriculture where we work so much land that works so closely with the environment. So that aside, there are two really big sources of emissions in agriculture. You can start on the crop side, and that's actually nitrous oxide. So we use a lot of nitrogen fertilizer to feed plants, be it corn, soybeans, you name it. I don't know if you guys use a lot of nitrogen fertilizer for coffee, but it is, it's a necessary food. And so when we don't get that nitrogen into the plant, it can be released into the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So that's by far the biggest. And then we can go straight to the cattle side of things, and methane. And methane emissions are also significant. Methane is also a very potent greenhouse gas. And so those are the two things we look at most closely in terms of emissions. But for both of those, there's stories about why they happen. And, and the one thing I would mention too, to all the producers, farmers and or ranchers, generally when you work to be profitable, knowing nothing about climate, you are doing things that reduce the emissions per unit of beef or per bushel of corn that occur. Again, because you don't waste fertilizer, it's a cost. You look for ways to put meat on efficiently, and that is done to increase your profits or balance your costs. And so you don't necessarily have to think about these things, but they are there. So those are the two big sources in agriculture. Both of them have a story. The best way to deal with nitrous oxide is just being an efficient, good user of fertilizer, which farmers and ranchers are, or farmers are.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't.
Well, yeah, because it costs money to use it. Like you said, you're gonna like do whatever you can to maximize your profitability and your yield, and not go beyond that.
Exactly.
You get diminishing returns.
Absolutely. Yep. And so it's built into the system.
Yeah.
And then on the methane side, there's interesting stories there, but that same phenomenon exists. But as we put more and more weight on the animals as they go to slaughter, which has just been something we've been doing for a few decades now.
I was going to say, it's been a discussion, I think, that's been more prevalent in the last few years about, are they too big? That's a whole other conversation. Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's something in the industry, right? But if we have more meat on each animal, those per pound of beef emissions decline significantly. The other thing that's really interesting about methane is it actually degrades in the atmosphere really fast. And so we're actually, if you think about the balance of things, we as agriculture own those emissions, for better or worse, but they're actually going down per pound of beef, and are flat and or going down in total. So we're actually, again, being more and more efficient without even knowing about it, trying it. That being said, it is something that, I do think hip pocket, farmers and ranchers should know about. And we'll see exactly how this plays out, financially, as different programs, either government programs or private industry things, kind of come online. The other thing to think about too, in terms of beef and a lot of different livestock, we feed various feed crops to them, so they end up owning some of those emissions too. So the nitrous oxide that comes when we produce corn, if that corn is then fed to cattle, the cattle also have ownership of those emissions.
Oh, okay. So it's like a cycle, basically, in terms of if you're thinking of livestock and how it's fed or whatever. Yep. So very interesting.
Yeah, and I guess that was a comment I was going to say too, was because, you look at beef production now, and almost in any livestock production, right? You want to produce more off of less animals, and that's kind of what we're doing in a sense. And I should say that is what we're doing over years, right? Because we are producing more pounds of beef with less amount of animals compared to decades ago. So in a sense, that is our producers becoming more efficient with their production management. And in a sense, like you're saying, it just turns around to improve things on the other end as well. Yeah. So I guess, so we talked about, I feel like whenever you start talking about like climate stuff and whatnot, it always lends back to cattle and just cattle in general. But I mean, other livestock production species and whatnot also have an impact, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do tend to focus on cattle because of methane emissions, and methane is very potent. But we do know, basically anything that we do there are emissions associated with it. And so that's why arguments to say that we have to eliminate all emissions are they're kind of nonsense, right? We have to do this. We need to eat. How can we?
Yes, food is always good.
Yeah.
It is. And I'd like to have it at least 3 times a day, right? So, please keep it coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have to live with this, but we certainly know we have estimates. And just so your viewers know, there is a huge system of accounting that's been developed over the last few decades that calculate the carbon footprint of pretty much everything. And for cattle producers in Nebraska or Hawaii or other parts of the country, we do have estimates. They're really high level estimates, but we do that math. And so one of the important things to note, one is that's being done, and 2, that it's probably wrong, right? So any particular producer has their own specific numbers that we haven't calculated yet, but that is being done because a lot of people care. And those people who care might be the UN or the federal government, or it might be Tyson, or it might be General Mills. And all of those parties can impact us in a variety of ways. And, we've talked a little bit about, government programs that might exist to incentivize either reducing emissions or to capture carbon in the soil. We also know that major cattle buyers like Tyson have already said, they're actively engaged in this space.
Yeah.
And that does go all the way back to the cow-calf producer. And it will go back to the corn producer, because if your customer cares about greenhouse gas emissions enough to determine where they're going to buy from, it does impact you. And so we know that. And Tyson has said, we have to do this to ensure that we can get financing. We want to do this because we think that our customers value it. That's somewhat debatable. But we do know, just again, from that practical standpoint, if Tyson, who ends up buying, what proportion of beef in this country, right? I mean, of cattle, it's a lot, right?
A lot. So I don't know what it is, but it's just a lot. So
as they go down that path, it does matter. And so just to keep that in mind, Tyson has said, we care. So if you provide feed to Tyson, the carbon footprint matters. If you provide livestock to Tyson, that carbon footprint matters. And right now, it might not matter much, but every year, every day, we're moving forward into this place where we have to consider what we're doing in terms of emissions. And again, that might be something as simple as saying these are the practices that we use to grow or to raise our livestock. Or it might be Tyson saying you have to do these things. But we'll see exactly how that comes about. But again, my goal in general for most people is just to understand that this is happening, and then to be ready in coming months and years, so you don't have to act surprised, so you'll know.
Okay, I'm going to ask what may be a dumb question and probably is like further back, but like I hear a lot with, again, carbon sequestration and carbon credits. I'm going to be honest, what exactly do those two things mean? Because I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I Googled it and still have no idea.
Yep. And so the carbon credits, and there's been a lot of discussion about this in the last year or so, especially on the crop production side. So there are folks who are interested in reducing their emissions. These are large corporations, and they can do that within their own business or with either their customers or their suppliers. Or if it's easier to do, they might go somewhere else in the economy and pay someone who will reduce emissions or capture carbon. And since those businesses, and it could be a farm or a ranch, since they offset those emissions of, say, Walt Disney Corporation, they're called carbon offsets. But anyways, different companies have and are paying for agricultural producers, for others to change their practices. The actual effect of those practices is typically estimated. We don't necessarily measure them really closely, but we're already seeing, relatively significant amount of funds flow from those buyers to a variety of suppliers. And again, there's a menu of different practices. There's and that is mapped to how much carbon is either captured in the soil or that isn't emitted, and that will drive the payment that a farmer or rancher would receive.
Nice. Because I guess in my head, when you're talking about this, I don't think of Disney, but I think of like when people do NRCS plans and stuff. I know it's not the same, but I'm like, in my head, maybe some of these things are already practices they're headed towards anyways. So
yeah, and there really is overlap.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, so when NRCS does their math, they've historically looked at a variety of environmental things, but not climate. In August, with the extra almost $20 billion, the Congress and the president said, okay, you need to add climate to the list. And they're doing it within their existing programs. And so they're essentially saying, okay, these are programs that we have science that says they reduce emissions or they capture carbon. And so they'll now they have more money available for those particular uses. So that's a government side of things. And in general, you can double dip. So you might,
I was gonna ask.
Yeah, no, and it's called stackability. So a producer who might do something like mob graze, or someone who might reduce their tillage, they might be able to get a payment from NRCS, and they might be able to get a payment as well from this carbon offset market, and essentially stack those payments.
Those carbon offset markets are run by usually through government agencies, or
that's what I was going to ask. I was like, is it a real, I hate to say it, a real market, or is it like several years ago, like they're attempting to establish the market type of thing,
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the carbon credit markets that we talk about, there's really two types. There's a regulatory market if it's government policy that creates it, or there's voluntary markets if there's folks like Disney Corporation or Microsoft who are buying. The mechanics of the voluntary market, which is for the most part bigger in agriculture, those rules are being established by individual corporations in tandem with one another. And it's really we use the term market or markets, and that's really what it is, but it's not formal and established and mature. A lot of these transactions are almost one-offs. So we have farmers in North Dakota who have a conversation with a large agricultural company, and they make a deal. So they sign a contract, and that's a trade. But the price that they received and the practice that they have and all those details of the contract are really unique. And so today, that's really what we're seeing dominate, is a variety of transactions, a variety of players, a bunch of different rules. I mean, some general consensus we're talking about a metric ton of CO2.
Yeah.
But there are all of these markets, all of these trades, the prices in any given transaction might be really different. And so we're really years away from saying, okay, the price of carbon is $100.
Yeah,
I might be getting $20, and my neighbor might have the same practice to be getting $50. My practice might be tweaked a little bit, or you could have someone doing something completely different. But what we're all doing is creating these carbon credits. So it's in many respects, what's being done too is we're all trying to create this system that over time is going to grow tremendously in size. So last year, we had less than $100 million in carbon contracts in agriculture. And the expectation is by as soon as 2030, there might be $50 billion annually in carbon offset credits. So you're talking about a growth of 500-fold.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like, that's a lot of potential uptick depending on the person and the opportunity and stuff. But
yeah, it really is.
With the private industry, if they're each requesting something different, how much is that costing me as a producer to do that? That's what I'm like. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll see exactly how all of that changes over the next 5 to 10 years. Because in general, we're really doing is we're kind of feeling our way. We're trying to figure things out. And we really don't know exactly where things are going to go. But by 2030, if certain regulatory decisions are made by the government, if there's a huge change in consumer demand, a lot of these corporations want to be ready. They want to be ready to say, okay, last year we bought $20 million worth of credits. This year we need to buy 500 million.
500.
And if the system isn't at least somewhat started, they're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But again, that's what they're trying to do. But the rules, the contracts, all of that is really kind of in its early stages. And we see this too, where the terms can change from week to week, as especially the companies looking for these are trying to find the best way to work with farmers and ranchers.
Right.
Ultimately, it would be fantastic, 10 years from now, we have this list of practices. We have these really solid estimates of the impacts in terms of emissions. We have a single price per ton of carbon. Right now, we're a long ways away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But
right now, most of these contracts are privately written, then essentially between farmers and other industry folks. Okay.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so it's tough because, again, when you could use the definition of a market to say we're talking about a single commodity, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be talking about,
yeah,
calves at this weight in this place at this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a market. Now we're talking about metric tons of CO2, and the terms are all over the place. So really, in many respects, each one of those transactions are for different products at different prices, and they're in some respects different markets. And so we hopefully we get to this place where everything matures and we have a single market.
Yeah,
right,
some unification of it is what it sounds
Yeah,
like. Hopefully it heads towards in the next few years. So.
Well, I definitely feel like it's a little clearer for me now. Because Shannon and I have always had these questions, and we just didn't know really where to search for the answers. And but that makes sense, because it's something that's in development. I feel like a lot of questions we get get here from Hawaiian producers is, they don't see that market coming here, because of our production practices, I should say, because we're small, we're smaller industry here compared to nationwide. What's your thoughts on things like that for some of the producers that are sort of like, our state is a lot smaller in production? What's your thoughts on carbon markets and how those types of things
for
are
smaller
going to impact
producers
us here?
Yeah.
No, I that's a great question, and I just go back to it is impacting everybody, and it will impact everyone even more as time goes on. So North Dakota, we actually have a really small beef cattle industry. You do a lot of cow-calf, and even with that type of practice and the limited numbers that we have, there are opportunities today to enter into carbon contracts, and it's only going to continue to grow. And we could certainly reach a point where even if your cattle producers don't market to a Tyson, they're still likely going to have some sort of oversight. It could be the government saying, do it this way, or we'll provide you payments for doing it that way. And I would really say that I can't even think of anybody who'd be able to escape that. Geography matters the tiniest bit.
Right.
But in general, you're part of this bigger market. And even if there was a case where it didn't directly affect a producer in Hawaii, it's still affecting the global price, right?
Right.
And I would say I think it would be exceptional in 5 or 10 years to find a producer anywhere in the United States who isn't impacted by this. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, and my expectation is it'll be a positive thing. It'll be a good thing. You'll be able to get a higher payment for doing things a certain way. And the other thing I'd recommend to everybody, one, first of all, recognize you have a liability. Two is you might have a really neat story that gives your cattle a marketing advantage. And we're talking about climate, we're talking about carbon, and that could be it, right? I mean, there could be things that you do in central or western Nebraska or on the Big Island where, holy smokes, our emissions are different or better, and that's a marketable trait. That's something where you can capture value, and that's something I think we're going to appreciate more and more. Or there could be research done at one of our universities where it says, hey, this practice works really well. It reduces costs and it helps the environment. And 30 years from now, that'll be what everybody does.
Yeah.
And you don't even think about it. You'll remember, oh yeah, I remember when I was a kid, we did it this way. Like all the little kids out there whose folks are in this business, they're going to be looking back and say, yeah, we do it this way now too. I mean, what they did before made sense, but now we do it this way and it's better. And so a lot of that research and learning is going to be exciting.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, again, is not necessarily going to be detrimental in any way, but it might provide that advantage. And I think that as universities and industry kind of figure this out, we're going to see significant investment in those types of innovations. And that'll be really exciting. And it can give almost any cattle producer a unique market niche where you can say, okay, first, my cattle are produced here and I do this really neat thing. And some buyer might be out there saying that is exactly what I want.
Looking for. Yeah.
Yep. And case in point, I was talking to an agribusiness owner, and they happened to be purchased by a large hedge fund because they had just a little neat part of their story, and that made them very, very valuable. And so they had no intention of being purchased by anybody, but someone came to the table and said, we will pay. Wow. And I don't think that folks are necessarily going to come and get into the cattle business, but they might find your producers and that story, and it might be a smaller carbon footprint or something completely different. And again, that will provide possibly a source of revenue, but may ensure that we remain a viable industry, right? And so that to me is really, really exciting. It's kind of this crossroads of climate and carbon and universities and producers. And I don't know exactly how fast it's going to go or in which way, but I just know that when there are folks who are possibly going to spend up to $50 billion for things like that, we will learn. We will do things differently.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of incentive for anybody. So, even if you're only getting like a small percentage of a small percentage, that's a lot of money.
It really is.
In my mind,
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, and the $20 billion, again, if you start at that 100 million last year, and then you think the federal government just put in 20 billion, and then $1 billion, that's still a lot of money. Even with inflation, that's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And that's over the course of 4 years. And then it might be 50 billion. It wouldn't just be agriculture, but ag would have a huge piece of that. Every year it's significant. And again, it's a lot of money, but we don't know exactly how it's going to be rolled out. How much of that is going to go to a corn producer in Iowa or Nebraska? How much is going to go to a
livestock producer in Nebraska or Hawaii or wherever, Colorado or whatever. Yeah. That's so interesting though. I would think that the opportunity for this and learning more about it to me is just very interesting, because I feel like, I know you've been at this job for a while, but like it feels like it's like at the very forefront where it's really starting to sort of pick up steam. So, because I was like, I remember when we met a while ago, let's say a few years ago now at this point, but I was like, I did not have any clue or understanding of what you were doing at the time. But this, like, just where we're at in the world right now, I'm like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I was like, and again, based on what I would assume is consumer demand and things like that, pushing a lot of this forward. So, I mean, it seems like a really interesting area.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. And, things went from being kind of quiet to very busy. And that's enjoyable. And again, it is coming. Now the federal government has basically said, we are a major player in this, $20 billion, major player, farm bill coming up. Who knows exactly what's going to be in it, but they're going to solidify that. The activities to date in those by those private companies, really significant. And where it could go relatively quickly is really exciting. But again, I do look at, the term climate smart agriculture, which is now kind of a buzzword. That's what the federal government sees. They see these benefits that we can get from production agriculture, and they put more than just that $20 billion into it to date. And then we at universities have to do more research to say, hey, how can we take advantage of this? How can we help our cattle industries in our state or crop production in our state? How can we help them, be successful as this environment changes?
Yeah, exactly. Seeing those connections and the research and whatnot develop is very interesting. You start to see these smaller projects come out and headlines, and Shannon and I just kept going, okay, what are they doing here? And so it's good to be able to talk with you and kind of understand, where this is all coming from, and how we can understand it better. And even for our producers, because we always feel like sometimes we are a smaller industry here, in the islands, and we are disconnected sometimes from the mainland states, that we feel like some of this does, how do we use it here, right? And how does it apply to us? That's always what we want to know. And I always, never really, in the past, I've been with Extension over 10 years now, but, growing up and stuff, I never really thought about the connections from the States. We always just really processed a lot more local products and beef here. Now that we ship off so much, 80% of our calf herd, and weaners that go off to the state, those kinds of things and these types of projects, or I should say, even these carbon markets are probably going to be something, I should say, we know it's going to be something that's going to impact those types of markets and the industry on that end of for us, where folks are either retaining those ownership of those animals or not. I'm sure that those are all it's all gonna play a part in that. So
I mean, it's exciting, and I think one of the challenges, I'm happy to chat anytime. But there is a lot going on, and I think one of the challenges is for everybody to remain up to speed. Again, like the benefit of my position, which is very unique with an Extension nationally.
Yeah. I think you're the only one I know that has that position within Extension out of the many universities at this point. I can say that I've worked.
I have one colleague at the University of Wisconsin Extension who's close, who is very close, and he does a little bit of dairy stuff too. But outside of that, and so it's exciting, but you have to think too. I mean, I spend most of my day immersed in this. And every day I learn something new. Hopefully it's news to everybody, but sometimes it's not. And I think one of the challenges that we face going forward is just staying up to speed, because things are developing so quickly. And so, I mean, I would definitely, encourage, you and the viewers and your producers, just to keep their eyes open and their ears ready to hear something that might be happening. And again, is this a buyer on the mainland? Is it, a processor in Nebraska? Who knows exactly what's going to come about, but you're going to get hit from a number of angles. And I don't know exactly when you will get that piece of information that will be a valuable, that actionable thing that says, oh, wow, I really need to sit down and think about adopting this new practice. Or I really need to think about a way to document what I've been doing, because there are customers who will pay. But all of that is coming to a head really quick. And, we'll get to a point where this is part of the mainstream. This is part of what we do. In North Dakota, we follow weather in South America because it affects us. Well, our cattle producers will be, they will be getting on the radio or in whatever news they follow. Okay, here's some things that are happening in this carbon space, and we'll have buyers who are up to speed, who can tell that story. We'll have Extension who is there also with information and resources. But it's going to take just a little while.
Are there some good websites or places to go to for people that really do kind of want to keep up to speed or get updates, or is there an email news list that I could sign up for? I would have wondered if other people were thinking the same thing, where they could, keep up to date with what's happening with some of this.
Yeah. I mean, right now, unfortunately, there really isn't. I would expect that over time that will emerge. And again, it's because there's so many different players doing their own thing.
Okay.
And even within the university system, even those of us who work at it, the we haven't gotten to the point too where it's like, okay, we need to have a person who does this full time all the time, because I this is part of my space, but I also do a bunch of other stuff too.
I know.
And so it's the, who's going to own this and who's going to push it. And maybe it will be, maybe it'll be private industry. Maybe it'll be some ag journalists who say, yeah, we do want to curate all of this carbon news. Or maybe you'll have a single person who realizes, gosh, I could be the beef cattle climate person and be there, for all of the industry across the country. I had the opportunity to speak last October to a group of feed ingredient suppliers. And again, it would, feed for a variety of livestock, really intelligent folks, middle managers and higher from all over the country. Most of them had no clue, including folks who sell significant amounts of feed to Tyson.
Wow.
That news about their customer, probably their major customer, was not on their radar. And those types of things matter. But, I think we'll hopefully get to that place. And I do know, too, that as the federal government builds out their presence, and they're doing that with the funding, they're going to do that with the new farm bill, that might help us address some of those things. I mean, one of the things NRCS has said is we need to find out a way to provide this technical assistance to producers. And that's exactly right. It's like, and I sit there and I go, yes, that's, extension can be part of that, but it's in addition to all the other great stuff that we do.
Right.
And so we'll see
I was
how
going
that's
to say
built
one more
out.
thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly it. And I'd even mention, I've been in my position for over a decade. There was a reason why up until the last 2-3 years, I didn't really talk about carbon and climate, because cattle producers, farmers had more than enough stuff to think about, right? Things that were more important, more urgent. And now we've gotten to the point where having just that basic understanding, kind of that kind of climate literacy is helpful. But I also know that there's other things going on. So it's not as if we all need to spend all day, every day learning about this, but just to understand that this is real, it impacts us, and it will become increasingly important in the future is really, really important. And the last thing I want is for people to be surprised or not ready when certain opportunities come around. At the same time, 2 years ago, it simply was not a priority, and now we've reached that time where just a basic understanding, I think everybody in agriculture should have.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And I was like, to be honest, I was like, I've heard people speak about like carbon and carbon sequestration, and credits before, but I was like, I feel like this is the first time I kind of have an actual base understanding. And I'm sure we're just at the very like tippy top of the iceberg for a lot of this. So, I was like, I feel like a little bit like there's a light bulb that went off. I don't know about you, Ballet.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it has made things a little clearer for us to understand, and and it also put information out there for our producers of when they ask the questions, they don't feel like it's something that maybe we need to focus on, but maybe it is something that we need to keep in the back of our minds to be thinking about, and just when we hear those topics come up, pay a little bit closer attention to probably the information that's being shared, or maybe even information that comes down our way. We should be sharing. And not always think that it's important here in Hawaii too. So
stay up to date. I think it's important everywhere, because I agree with David. It's especially with the amount of money the government is putting into the program. And also, again, I would just say, I don't know, I haven't seen any actual surveys, but based on just watching TV and stuff, it certainly seems like there's like a push from consumers and stuff towards that sort of sort of a market, I guess. I'm probably not putting that very correctly, y'all, but
I think it's right.
Yeah.
And it might be coming from consumers, and it might not, but we know that there are very, very successful, very, very powerful corporations, not even involved in agriculture, who take climate seriously. And because they're willing to spend money for us to change our practices, that to me is a signal enough. And again, one of the things in conversations, climate science, there's consensus around it, but it really doesn't matter. if the government comes and regulates you, their reasoning really isn't important. That regulation still stands.
Yeah.
If a customer comes and they like something about your product and they're willing to pay for it, correct or not, their money is real money. And so that's the one thing, just that practical nature of this makes it such that you really can't ignore it. And all of these corporations, they're very large, they're very advanced, they have a pulse on what's going on.
I was going to say, I would assume these big corporations have the studies and the numbers to back up with what they're spending their money on, because my experience with large corporations and stuff and the big mouse or whatever is that, like, they don't do it unless, there are numbers to back up what they're spending their money on. Cause like, they're thinking long-term in a lot of ways. So It doesn't always seem that way, but they are.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people miss that this is part and parcel of modern corporate thought. How do we deal with climate? And even for them, if climate impacts them or not, if the regulators come and say this matters, it matters. If Wall Street says we won't give you financing unless you do these things, it matters.
It matters.
Yeah. And that just says nothing of, if these climate risks are real, there are all sorts of businesses all over the world who have exposure. If extreme weather events, increase in number, if sea level rises, that matters to Walt Disney, right? Those types
Especially
of things
in Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really big deal. And so we'll see how it all plays out. But the fact of the matter is, these things are and will continue to impact production agriculture. And so you have to stay attuned because, it's going to affect you one way or another. It doesn't matter what your personal preferences are.
Yeah.
If someone is going to come, or if the regulator is going to come, we all need to be ready. And that all being said, I'm generally almost entirely the opinion this is a net positive for agriculture. And we saw that with the $20 billion. We see that with folks coming to farmers. They're coming with carrots and not with sticks.
That's always nice.
Yeah. And the one thing I'd say too about cattle, the cattle side is really interesting. It's younger. It's about 3 or 4 years behind. There's some good science that support these different practices, but a lot of the work to date has been on crop production. But that's just because these things take time. But the ways in which we raise livestock in this country are going to change. And again, that doesn't mean that anyone necessarily has to change at all. But as we understand this more, as money comes to the table, people will respond. And to me, that's really exciting. But the cattle stuff might take another 5 or 10 years before it really takes hold. And who knows exactly when that might be your producer who's sitting there at the table with that contract saying, okay, I'll accept these payments for doing something new. And the one thing I go back to you, Shannon, made the comment about the size of these funds. It's significant. I mean, there are farmers who sign contracts and they, that day they get a check for $100,000 or more. I mean, these are not necessarily small payments. If you're a smaller producer, yes, it does scale, but certain practices are really, really advantageous. And if you have those, that's of value and will probably be of increasing value in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, because we're all still going to drive vehicles especially in the US.
Yeah, and we're still going to eat food, right?
Yeah,
there's no way.
All those things.
Yeah, there's no way we're not eating beef in my household, right? You tell me if I have to pay more, maybe I will, but we're still going to eat it. Yeah. And so
I was going to say, we were just talking about prime rib dinners the other day, and I was like, that's like my favorite. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, we're limited to whatever ribeye steaks we get off our half of beef, but yeah.
I'm sure it's really good North Dakotan beef, though. So.
Well, it's my in-laws, so it's family stuff. So I would never dare say anything negative.
It's always good. No,
it's always good. It's always great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you, David. I think that does make things a lot clearer. I feel like that's a good information for me. I understand a little bit more about the carbon market and all those credits and different terms. Yeah, that we were really kind of questioning. Yeah. So, and I know that there's way more to your position than just the carbon aspect of things, because in extension, that's just how it goes. You wear hats to many different things. So I'm sure at some point we'll probably get you back to talk more and maybe give us an update about things and what's going on. But is there anything else you want to share with us, either about your projects, that your current projects or research that you're doing, or anything else?
Not really. I would just say that now that our weather in North Dakota is nice, I'm not quite as jealous of living in the islands or even Nebraska.
I was gonna say we're still nicer than you were last week. So
oh, very much.
It was in like the 80s. I was hot. I was like, oh God.
Yeah, we're gonna have our 2 months of nice weather here shortly. So
yes. Yeah, that's
Did you say 2 months of nice weather? Is that what it is?
That's what we hope for.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was pretty excited when I saw a little bit of snow in Chicago, and I got really excited, and Shannon told me, Melly, that's just spit. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
To me, it's white and it's coming down from the sky. So it's
we did actually get fluffy snow a little bit at one point.
A little bit, yeah. So, well, thanks again, David, for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time to come and share and talk with us about some cattle and carbon here, so we can share that information with our producers here in the state.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So we do hope our listeners found this informative and that it will be useful to them. Also, if you have not already done so, please be sure to fill out our feedback fest, which will be listed below, to let us know your thoughts about this podcast and what you want to learn more about in the future.
Yeah, make sure to follow us on our social media pages, the Livestock Walaʻau and Livestock Extension Group, if you haven't already, and be sure to visit the UHCTAR Extension website and our YouTube channel, which will also be listed in our show notes.
Yes, and for additional information about this topic, see the show notes of the podcast and the description box of the YouTube page. Thanks for listening to the Livestock Walaʻau. But before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast. That's us, by the way, by leaving us a review anywhere you listen to this, and then stay tuned for next month's episode.
Yes, thanks again to our sponsors, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, the Livestock Extension Group, and CTAR, and the University of Nebraska Lincoln Center for Ag Profitability. Thanks again for listening to the Livestock Walaʻau, and thank you again, David, for joining us.
Thank you. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
Bye.